Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, December 23rd, 2025, and today we are talking bed widths, the if I had my druthers ideal mulch strategy, and where does the tech make sense in agriculture? I don't think anybody calls it the tech. I'll call it the tech. So let's do it. All right, everyone, welcome to Tilth Tuesday. Every Tuesday is brought to you by our friends at Tilth Soil, and it is officially their pre-sale season for 2026, so check that out at tilthsoil.com/farmers to get a pretty sweet deal on potting mix for next season. Link will be in the show notes. I hope your weeks are off to a nice start. We had a mildly warmer day yesterday with a few more queued up, headed towards the Christmas holiday, and I'm pretty psyched to finally get the greenhouse slowly cleaned up. It's not a very interesting process, but I basically take everything out, clean up the floors as well as I can, and then put everything back. Part of that is just, it's just nice to have a clean greenhouse and workspace heading into the spring. And part of that is when you're dealing with so much soil mix, stuff starts to germinate right there on the floors. And that can become a mess pretty quickly. So getting that cleaned up really well becomes an essential yearly task. 1 or 2 years there when we first started this new farm on this new property and needed the extra covered growing space, we grew right in the middle of the greenhouse. I think our first year was a bed of tomatoes, and then that winter we actually grew onions over winter and then harvested those out of that bed and then moved them into the field. But then we finally got like an actual high tunnel up and running, so we didn't really need that. We kind of needed the greenhouse space instead because it was definitely overcrowded that first year. So I got rid of that system, but it worked in the first 2 years to have that little extra greenhouse high tunnel combo. Anyway, that's about all I can say about that that's even remotely interesting. Real quick reminder, we will not be here tomorrow, Thursday or Friday, because Mike and I need at least a few days to prepare for the Brighton and Hove Albion versus Arsenal game this weekend, obviously. So anyway, we will be back on Monday to party and get ready for the new year. Yep, 2026 coming right up. All right, so since we're continuing our mulch series until that new year, I was looking at my garden the other day and I thought, if money were no object, what would I do here? I guess if money were no object, I would find flatter, better farmland. But in this thought experiment, for whatever reason, I have lots of money, but can't actually leave this farm. And before I go on, I think the value in thought experiments like this is to figure out what you really need and if it's actually possibly in reach more than you think it is. So anyway, that's why I kind of do these. So without question, just in terms of ease of work, I love compost mulches. Like that is my ideal. They are just so incredibly simple to work with. You can do a lot of that mulching work in the winter when the ground is even frozen if you want to. In fact, in Kentucky, winter is mostly mud season, so frozen ground is somewhat preferred, but that's neither here nor there. Actually, it's everywhere here. But anyway, you can start planting those as soon as you want to. You don't have to wait for dry weather. You don't have to wait. You could do it in the rain. You could do it in the snow if you wanted to. Not recommended, but you could. I love working with compost mulch, but the reality with compost mulch, as we've talked about numerous times on the show, is, well, several things. It can be expensive. There's that. In other words, there is a point at which you are spending more money on creating the bed surface by buying that compost than the crop is able to earn you, or at least it cuts, dramatically into your profitability a bit more than just basic cultivation techniques would. There's also the problem of the fact that the compost available in bulk itself here can be pretty mediocre, if not downright bad, filled with plastic, unfinished. It's like not fully composted, potentially contaminated. Then, of course, there's a whole nutrient issue where compost mulches can come with quite a bit of nutrient overload to the soil, especially in terms of phosphorus, but also potentially nitrogen and other nutrients. But I do love it as an approach to bed management. So I would probably start there. I would start with buying or making the best imaginable nutritional compost balanced with a full slate of nutrients, cured, finished, uncontaminated, the works. But that still would come with some risks of over-application on the nutrient side. So I would also want some good organic straw to lay under the compost, lasagna style, every fall to help kind of absorb some of those excess nutrients. Then, of course, I'd probably throw in some cover crops to get it all jamming along nicely. So lasagna mulching, good ingredients, and that would be done every fall going into the winter to get set up for the spring and summer production with almost no work involved in the growing season. Yeah. It'd be dreamy. Now, technically, this is something that someone could do, and some people do. For certain growers with access to the space and materials for good compost making and a tractor, and for people in areas where they can get good non-sprayed straw, it is all possible. Is it possible on a budget, though? In the short term, probably not, at least for us. For us, the compost we have access to at that level of bulk right now, though there are several Kentuckians working on it, appreciate them, is not the worst, but it's not exactly what I would recommend, and it's not cheap nor always fully finished. So once it got here, we'd have to improve it for a few months before applying it. That's possible, I suppose, but we don't have a tractor, which would add to the expense. There is also the option of just having people deliver wood chips and allowing that to break down for a few years, and then using that as kind of, combined mulch, but that's not quite the balanced compost I'm looking for, and would have to be mixed with other compost, which again, without a tractor is a daunting task for a half acre's worth of compost. That said, in a situation where you have a tractor or access to one, there is some there. The straw side is a little more complicated for us, not living in a grain growing region. We need someone locally to see the value in growing organic or at least non-sprayed straw from some sort of grain. I think if I'm getting real idealistic about it, and why not, it would be cool/ideal to create a market for the organic grain to effectively create a supply for the organic straw. That might be selling the grain for the grower who grows that grain/straw at your market, or teaming up with them to produce it and then buying the straw as well. So the whole product is already marketed and dealt with before they ever put the seed in the ground. For the compost, perhaps it's a similar idea where perhaps you take one of those ideas we've talked about in previous segments about, bringing someone onto the property to set up their own compost operation in exchange for compost or something like that. And then you have access to it. In other words, I guess what I'm getting at is that if you have an ideal vision for what systems you'd like to use and what mulches, maybe what's missing is not the funds for it, but the holistic vision for how to make those materials more available, more affordable, more abundant for yourself and maybe everyone else in the area. Anyway, that's as far as I got on that thought. Standing there in the garden, looking longingly for ideas. What say you all? Let us know. And otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk bed widths like you do after breaks. Didn't know that, did you? BRB.
Hey nerds, this is Jeff from Proserpina Farm in the Patch in Victoria, Australia. And this is what our garden looks like the day after solstice. I've just spent the morning pruning tomatoes, and I've still got garlic to take out of their beds.
Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. Farmers who partnered with Farmhand say they grew an average of 63% this year because it's more than software. Farmhand is your business coach and assistant, helping to sell out, save time, and grow smarter with real data from real farms, shaping websites that convert, campaigns that sell, and fulfillment systems that run smoothly. Curious what that looks like? Meet the founder, Ari, at farmhand.partners/no-till and see the same insights and support the fastest growing farms rely on every week. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Adam Van Queek, who writes, quote, "What are your current thoughts about farming bed size? Do you use 30, 36, and 48-inch beds? Is one size better for certain crops?" End quote. All right, so this is a great question for a number of reasons. First is that I think bed size is a really interesting topic and can be determined by a number of different factors. And then second, we upgraded our bed size in 2020/2021, so we've actually had like 5 full seasons with it now, and have some thoughts about larger bed sizes and about what transitioning to a new bed size looks like. Now, the standard bed width in the market garden world right now is 30 inches or like 75 centimeters, and to some extent, for good reason. Most of the tools are set to 30 inches. It's easy to step over 30 inches. You can harvest the whole bed from one side relatively easily. Plenty of things to like about that system, and to be sure, there is no perfect system. They all have pros and cons, so it's as good as any other. For years, that's what we used. We were growing on 30-inch beds from 2014 through 2020, I think. The pathways were mostly about 14 inches, though I think they were like 12 inches in the tunnels, if I remember correctly, which is impossibly small, but we wanted to maximize that space. Anyway, when we moved to the new farm, I decided to reevaluate the size of both the beds and the pathways. And when we looked at the space, we saw a limited production area and calculated that the best use of the space would be like 48 inches, that's like 122 centimeters, and 18-inch pathways. What I came to realize in that 30-inch bed system is just how much space is handed over to pathways. Effectively, when you do the math, depending on the space you have, you will get fewer beds using 48-inch beds, in our case, or 36 or 38 or whatever makes sense for you, but you will get more square footage of growing space. I actually did a video about this a few years ago that I will link in the show notes, and watching it back makes me a little nostalgic for being able to shoot these outside, these videos, but the challenge, with that is always, well, the weather doesn't always, or frankly, often cooperate when you're trying to shoot outside in Kentucky. Our neighbors mow a lot. Trucks and cars are loud here in Kentucky. Some days it's also just cold or, rainy or hot or windy or all of the above somehow, all at once. Anyway, when I do the outdoor videos, it's often a battle even to find the opportunity. But yes, when we did the math, we realized on this new farm, we could have fewer paths and more growing space, even with the increase in our path widths from 14 inches to 18 inches or 35 to 45 centimeters. And thus 48 inches, the beds that we have now, made more sense to me because, well, I hate managing pathways as much as I hate mowing my lawn. And I wanted that more growing space. Honestly, it's somewhat difficult for me to now look at 30-inch beds / 75 centimeter bed systems because all I see is pathways. It's just so many pathways. But the 48-inch, the 122 centimeter wider beds, is not without its challenges either. One, we had to shrink the length because unlike a 30-inch system, it's not as easy to step over them. I'm like 5'11", which is 1 meter 80 in metric. And it's a stretch for me to, get over them without jumping, which is not the safest thing. Now, I will sometimes just walk over them because the amount of mulch we have, reduces the risk of compaction, but we had to shrink the length to 50 feet from 100 feet so that we could easily walk around them to get to the other side, especially if you have something tall like tomatoes in the middle that you can't step over or jump over, or at least I can't. I'm not as athletic as I want to be. Also, almost none of our old row covers or hoops that were set up for the 30-inch bed system make quite as much sense anymore, and we've had to slowly upgrade to wider row covers and shade cloths and insect nettings. I was able to, make some of it work, but what would cover 2 beds before now only covers 1 bed. Also, our equipment is still all based around 30 inches, so we end up doing double passes, like mowing a bed, for instance, when we used to just need a single pass. And moreover, there is overlap in the center, right? Because, 30 inches plus 30 inches is 60 inches. So that guarantees a 12-inch overlap in the middle of a 48-inch bed when using 30-inch equipment. I'm sure all these numbers are really fun to listen to if you're just listening to this on podcast. So shouts to that. The gritter is one of my favorite tools. It puts down lines so that you know where to plant. It puts down, literally puts a grid down on the ground just by rolling over fresh soil, but it's built for 30-inch systems. So I've had to come up with some tricks to use it, on our 48-inch bed system, like going down the center of the bed and then eyeing the 2 outer rows for lettuce, for instance. Or I will go, over one side and then line it up and then go over the other side with a little overhang, or it's not incredibly perfect, but it gets pretty close, but it takes double the passes. I do like how many interplanting options I have on a 48-inch bed. I do like that I can put 2 beds of tomatoes right next to each other, which I could not do in a 30-inch bed system. Because they were just too close. You always have to skip a bed in a 30-inch bed system because you just can't have the tomatoes that close together. Sometimes spacing just makes more sense where you added over, just over 50% more space to the width, but you're getting more than 50% more crops. But sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't give you more than 50% more crops. Like lettuce, for instance, I get an extra 2 rows, but I don't get an extra 3 rows by having a 48-inch bed. Whereas with something like carrots, where I used to do 4 or 5 rows on a 30-inch bed, I can now do 8 comfortably. But again, that will depend on your spacing and goals for each crop if it makes sense. But it's really just mathway management, as they call it. Someone calls it that. Anyway, let me know your thoughts and experiences with beds and bed widths, and we will take a quick break. When we return. Tech's on deck. Oh, remember tech decks? The little skateboard I had. I could do a mean kickflip on those. That's not what this is about, but it could be. Be right back.
Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Trax to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud supporter of Growers Daily. At Johnny's, they do more than sell seeds. They grow them. They trial them to see how they perform on Johnny's research farm in Maine and across the U.S. and Canada. Only the best varieties are added to their catalog and website. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seedling to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. JohnnySeeds.com. That's JohnnySeeds.com. All right, back to the show. So the other day I was reading this article about how ranchers in Wyoming and elsewhere are using GPS tracking collars on cattle that act similar to electric dog collars, I guess, basically invisible fencing. This allows those ranchers not only to track the cattle, but can enable them to graze specific areas or conserve, specific sensitive areas without physically fencing them off. Perhaps most importantly, this can allow ranchers to get rid of the barbed wire fencing altogether. Of course, that saves them money, which is all well and good and whatever, but perhaps more importantly, in my eyes at least, is that it reduces stress on the local wildlife and ecology, much of which can get tangled in fences. And anyway, whether this is a good long-term solution or not remains to be seen, but it got me thinking about this idea of where tech and farming collide and where, we should draw the line. If you think, however, that I have a great answer for this, I'm sorry, I don't know that I do, but that doesn't mean I won't talk about it because that's kind of how I roll, but also it's how I figure out how I feel about something. So anyway, yeah, let's do that. We are obviously in a technological boom age right now, and that tech boom is colliding with even, contributing considerably to massive ecosystem and environmental decline across the world. So it's hard for me to say that the solution should ever be technological. It just is. At the same time, there are a lot of people on this planet and they need food and they need the food to be affordable. So we need, some solutions that also don't degrade the environment, which they also need. Therefore, we need solutions that enable ranchers to not, concentrate animals in feedlots, but without fencing that can cost tens of thousands of dollars per acre plus repairs, because they aren't going to do that. And we need solutions that can lead to greater ecological outcomes, like those that enable large-scale rotational grazing, to use this example, and prevent cattle from grazing sensitive native plants and destroying habitats. My preference will always be for low technology, and there are already pretty simple electric wire options for cattle, though they do still affect wildlife to some extent. But my preference will always be for low technological solutions because I can't extract the results of the technology from the effects of it, the uses of it from the costs, to creating it. However, I also acknowledge that people aren't going to just put down their phones, move out of the cities, and everything else it would require to save the planet from complete depletion. We as a society just aren't going to change that significantly, at least not that rapidly, and no amount of suggesting we all should will make it happen. So until there is some wholesale shift away from the world we currently live in, I wonder about the price of technologies like these to slowly combine the world we live in now with the, actual world we live on, but also showing some of the results to these ranchers, these larger producers, these people who in some cases could be depleting the soil and depleting the environment, to show them what the potential is of protecting it and conserving it. I wonder if these sorts of technologies won't open larger scale farmers up to more ideas or create pathways to more ecological conservation. I do think a lot of ranchers see the value in managing their land more responsibly, but sometimes, like it is with the straw and compost situation I described in the first segment, it's expensive and it doesn't always make business sense. Make it easier and more affordable to manage the land, and perhaps we will see more ecological land management. We certainly need more of it. Is this particular collar thing a solution? I guess we'll see, but at least it's a shot at one. Anyway, you all let me know your thoughts. Otherwise, everyone, have a wonderful rest of your week. Watch some soccer, cheer on your Brighton and Hove Albion Seagulls. That's my gift to you, hopefully. Have a lovely holiday if you celebrate, or just have a nice breather because the growing season is ramping up again soon. We got to get ready for that. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow this podcast wherever you're getting it. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Send her an email. She'll appreciate that. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of December, got only a few more of those to say, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs today to Carly Bain, Aurora Chacon, Aurora Chacon, and Ryan Robinson. Shouts to you all. All right. So as you will remember from yesterday, our journalist Bella was sent deep into the French Alps to investigate a village that someone had discovered. And it was deep. It was so deep in the woods and mountains that no one had ever even noticed it until a hiker, their source, and that's at least what the source said they were, happened upon it and told this journalist to look into it. So the source didn't give much info beyond that, and just that it was worth reporting on, and it may, in fact, change the world. And so when Bella and her guide, an industrious young hiker named Alex, found the village, what they found there was not what they had expected. I don't know what they expected. They half expected to find some group that had, like abandoned society to form their own commune, or potentially like a large family that had just sequestered itself off from the mountains. But no, it was nothing like that. Instead, what they found was a quiet village full of journalists. In fact, some of the best journalists in the world were there, and dozens from all over Europe. None of them able to get any cell service at all, and then it occurred to each of them kind of all simultaneously, with many of the best journalists in the world 2 days away from any cell phone service or civilization, what was happening in the world that someone didn't want them to report on. Anyway, a festive story for a festive week. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you next Monday. Bye.